Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good
Morning,
morning.
Janet.
Hi, everybody.
Morning.
Annis.
Morning.
We're waiting for everybody to come in, and then we'll get started in a few minutes. So just for fun, I know people are calling from different areas other than Bakersfield, or calling in, or whatever it is, tuning in. Anybody want to say where you're tuning in from? I know Annis is not in Bakersfield.
Right, I'm on the Oregon coast right now.
Well, okay. I was going to say, I actually, if you want to put it in the chat, sorry about that. I meant to say that, but yeah, Oregon coast, awesome.
I'm at my church handing out food, so I may go back and forth as people come to get their food.
Good for you, Beth. Marty will soon be coming to us from Colorado.
Next month, probably.
Yeah.
No, because I have you for protection. Oh, whoopee.
So anybody else? We're going to get started here in just a few moments.
I may go away for a while. Because when they're done, I'm done here. I'm going to take my
That's okay,
laptop
Beth.
and go back home. So there may
Okay.
be a few minutes when I am away from a Wi-Fi.
That's okay. And by the way, why don't you go ahead and mute yourself now, because if there's extra noise in the background, and I'm going to end up muting
Gotcha.
everybody here in a minute.
Okay, for those of you who are appearing as black boxes right now.
That means they don't have their cameras on.
Yeah, there should be a thing to join video.
We have it done
There
that
we
way.
go.
People, Marty, we have it. People can undo their video if they want. A lot of people don't because they're still eating breakfast or something. So anyway, I
Whatever.
always let people just do the video if they want to. So, all right. So if everybody can mute themselves, if not, I will do it. But then I'll end up muting. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to mute all. Okay, so everybody's muted. Donna, I want you unmuted, and Jenny. I put you two on unmuted. So Donna, are you unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So just to let you know, I'm Joan Raymond, president of Writers of Kern, and Donna, wave Donna, is our vice president. So she and I will be hosting this morning's meeting for the business part of it. And even if you're not a member, I really hope you stick around for this business part, because we have some fun stuff. We're gonna be doing a small writing exercise. We're gonna have breakout rooms, so people will have a chance to chat with each other, because I know that's the one thing a lot of us are missing the most, is actual talking back and forth to somebody. So like we used to sit at tables. Anyway, well, I'm going to get started because we have a lot to do, and our guest speaker will be coming on right before she starts talking. So I want to go through all this. So welcome, everybody. I know a lot of you do not have cameras on, and some of you don't have access to camera, and that's okay. So, but I was going to say, if you have a camera on, if you are a guest and you've never been to a Writers of Kern meeting, can you just like wave at me? Allison, I see you. And I can't see all the screens because there's several. We've got 29, and Bill, welcome. And Gary, I see you there. Okay, great. And like I said, we've got 29 people, so I got to scroll through 2 screens. And so normally we introduce our guests and visitors, but right now, since there's so many people, it's a little difficult to do. So just know that we appreciate you being here. Submissions. Has anybody, this is one thing we do every single month because we're writers, and for those of us that are writers, has anyone submitted anything to any publication in the last 30 days? Raise your hand. Natalia, Carla, Julie, Shelley. I'm probably missing a few people. If you see any more, Donna, you can let me know. Anybody else? Okay. That's awesome. That's awesome. And so here's the bigger question. Is anybody had a rejection come back from all your, oh, Natalia, let's give her a, a hand, because we celebrate rejections at Writers of Kern, because that means you're sending something out. Actually getting a rejection is one of the hardest things for a writer, because do contests count? Yes, they do. You know what? I need to bring up the chat because I'm not seeing it. Oh, Calgary, Alberta. That's awesome. I asked people where they were calling in from, so we've got somebody from Calgary, Alberta. Carly, no big deal about a camera. You can still see us. And contests, yes, that counts. I mean, if you've submitted to a contest and then got rejection, it still hurts a little bit, still pings. So, and then the last thing is, does anybody have a success story? And if you do, a success story means that you have gotten an email back that said you've been accepted for publication, or that you've self-published a book, or you've had a traditionally published book, or something like that. Oh, Maryland, awesome, Leslie. Sandy, let's see, how many people have, okay, Anna's, I'm gonna unmute you. Sandy, can you unmute yourself and talk for a second? Okay, just tell us briefly what your book is.
I just got final confirmation that I will be in the Christmas Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Yay, that's awesome. Congratulations. Okay, and then go ahead and mute you. Okay, and Annis, I saw you had something. Okay, hold on, I just hit unmute. There you go.
Yes, the anthology that Anke Hodenpyle and I've been working on is going to press this month and should be out before the end of October. You'll be hearing a lot more about it. We wrote poems and narratives that went with the board up artwork and photography from the protests around the United States. And it's going to be a fabulous book. So we're
That's
very
awesome.
excited. And knowing that it's going to press and we got the copyright already with our names on it, we're like flying high.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
Thanks.
Anybody else? And Donna, help me spot people. Anybody else have something to share? And you don't have to be a member to share this. That's okay. Am I missing somebody? Okay. Awesome. Well, congratulations to you guys. Okay, so what we're going to do, and this has been fairly successful. Sometimes it's a little hard because if you have a lot of people that have, you know, they don't have a screen or something like that, but we are going to do breakout rooms, and I'm going to do it for about 10 minutes. If you don't want to, what it is I'm going to divide everybody. We've got 35 people in here right now, and I'm going to do like 7 groups of 5, or my math right now, because I'm thinking about a million things. I can even put 4 in a room. And so basically it's just going to ask you to join this other room. If you want to do it, great. If you don't want to do it, that's fine too, because I'm going to stay out here. But and we still have people coming in. So anyway, it's just kind of a fun way to kind of meet the other people. My suggestion is let them know where you're from. Oh, okay, sorry about that. I'm not sure how to say your name. Charia from Maryland wrote in the chat that she's had a poem accepted. I didn't see that, so congratulations, that's awesome. That's really great. I mean, being accepted is just like that huge boost we need, you know, to keep going on. Okay, so I am going to break out into, let's see, 8, 9. That's going to put 4 in a room. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create these breakout rooms. If you do not want to go, you can stay in here and chat with me. Oh, the other thing is I'm going to unmute everybody. So if you have a lot of background noise, you might want to mute yourself. Okay, everybody's unmuted. They should be. And what you can do is you can unmute yourself right now. Marty, you unmuted yourself. Anna's, okay. So you have to unmute yourself. I've done where it's unmute all. And then I'm going to do the rooms. And then I'm going to call you back in about 10 minutes. I need you to help me unmute people that are going to be speaking. Donna, now she's on a different page. Oh, there you are. So we've got 38 people here. And by the way, it's Kiera. I believe that's, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name. People mispronounce mine all the time. For some reason, it's Joan, but they think it's Joanne or Joanna. So I try really hard not to mispronounce people's names. So, okay, so we are going to have announcements. Sandy, where are you? There you are. Let me unmute you. Okay, Sandy has said, oh wait, sorry, I lied. Useful moments. So, I'm just jumping ahead here. All right.
I'll remute myself.
Well, you if you just don't sneeze or anything, you'll be okay. But okay, so from useful moments, what we do is we write for 3 minutes. If you want to do it, great. If you don't want to do it, that's fine too. But we just, sometimes people, they're like, okay, this is the only writing I get. So, so you have 3 minutes. I'm going to set the timer, and we're going to write about the word photograph. So like I said, if you want to write, that's great. If you don't, when we have our walk anthology that we publish every couple of years, and we always accept, well, that's one of the categories we will accept for. So anyway, I'm going to be quiet. You've got 3 minutes for photograph. And what you do is just write whatever comes to mind. So here's the fun part. Would anybody like to share? And I'm going to have 2 people share this morning. So if you want to share, raise your hand and we will unmute you. And Donna, I need you to kind of help me look through everybody. Gary, is that, you're raising your hand, Gary? Yes? No? Give me a thumbs up. Okay. So I'm going to unmute you, Gary, and go ahead and read what you wrote. I hit unmute, so you got to unmute it too.
I have a disease that's 1 in a million. And so I wrote, because it pertains to me. So it's true stories of my life with pictures of my excruciating pain that I go through.
Okay, thanks. Go
Because
ahead.
I get spasms, I get severe.
So what did you write? Is that what you wrote?
Yes.
Okay.
Because it gives me severe bruises from camps.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And who else? Susan, did you raise your hand? Okay, let me unmute you. Go ahead.
Okay, photograph, frozen moment, a moment in time and place. And often when I look at these pictures taken so long ago, it is the background that seems to rise to the fore. It's the where and the when and the what of that particular moment. It's the shed behind the sisters seated and posing for the shot. The rusted roof, which with layers of corrugated tin lifted and twisted out of shape with the winds. It's the chicken perched atop the fence and the morning glories. And then I ran out of time.
It's beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful. You're right. We have pictures, my mom's pictures from a long time ago, and they're of the family. But what I love is the old cars in the background, the cars from the 40s and whatnot.
It's one of the hazards of cropping photos for scrapbooks, you know? You can have serious regrets after.
Yeah. Maybe you should digitally crop them. All right, I'm going to mute you again. Okay, we have time for 1 more person. Anybody else? Anyone else brave enough to raise their hand and share? Okay, Julie, right? Julie? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I figured it would work because it's super short.
Awesome.
I saw the photograph Sally took when celebrating my 63rd birthday. It was taken from the side, a view I don't see of myself. Oh, I am getting old.
Awesome, thank you. I love it. All right, now we're going to bring in Sandy. I got to find you again, Sandy. And then, so Sandy's going to start with announcements. Donna is going to take over. And at one point, Annis is going to come in too. So Sandy, I've unmuted you. Or there you go. Okay.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to talk briefly about membership. You're always welcome as a guest to Writers of Kern meetings, but membership does have wonderful benefits. We have a lot of writing opportunities that you can be a part of if you're a member, and we have special other special meetings that you can only attend if you're a member. But today I just want to remind everyone that this is our time for membership dues. If you are a current member and you have not yet taken care of your dues for this fiscal year, which runs from July, starts in July every year, you have until the end of this month, midnight, September 30th, to pay your dues, or we automatically get wiped off the face of the earth, not as a whole, but as individuals, from what we call, some of us refer to lovingly as our mothership, which is the California Writers Conference. And they have an automated system that if renewals do not show up by midnight, September 30th, it deletes us. And what that means is, as a renewing member, you would have to pay an additional $20 fee to get back in, which goes to the CWC folks. So if you are a current member and you haven't yet taken care of your dues, you have a couple weeks left to do it. It also allows you right now to enter the fall writing contest if you are a current member, or if you are a new member paying your dues before the end of this month. So if you have any questions, you can send me your email in the chat room and I'll get back to you. Or you can go to the Writers of Kern website and put some question and information there, and it'll come to one of us, and we will be happy to answer any questions. If you're not sure how to submit your dues, again, send me a note and I will walk you through the process. It's very easy, and it is on our Writers of Kern website as well. And we are grateful that you're all here. I see some faces that I don't recognize. Leslie, welcome. And it's good to see new faces, and then so many of you guys that I've known and loved for a long time. Omni, it's good to see your face. I haven't met you yet, but I look forward to when we can get back into meeting in person and hug on each other again. But for now, just know that we are glad that you're here, and thank you for joining us today.
Okay, so like Sandy mentioned, a perk of being a member of Writers of Kern is our fall writing contest. So our fall writing contest started September 1st through, and it will go until the end of this month. So that's our submissions period, September 1st through September 30th. The details for the writing contest, including the submission guidelines, will be found on our website, writersofkern.com/fall writing contest. And it should be on your meeting agenda. But just visit the website and look for a fall writing contest, and it will have our the guidelines for that contest. But like we said before, you must be a current member of Writers of Kern by September 30th in order to be entered, or in order to have your entry accepted into the fall writing contest. So now, Annis, I'll give it to you.
Okay, thank you. You know, one of the things that is our aim here at Writers of Kern is to help writers get better and support writers of all levels. And so one of the ways we thought would be fun to do that is with an open mic. An open mic is when, just as it says, the mic is open and anybody who wants to can come and read their work. So we're starting open mic Mondays, starting the first Monday of October. On your agenda, if you downloaded it, there were some dates, and those dates are not for the Mondays. So those dates are for the Saturdays. So we're the following Monday. So it's October 5th, November 2nd, and December 7th, we'll be doing open mic Mondays. This is a perk for members, whether you want to read or whether you just want to be part of the audience and encourage other writers with their work. We would love to have you attend. In the next few days, you'll be getting an email from me that gives you the information about how to register so you link to join the Zoom meeting on October 5th. So look for that. I'll be sending out to members who are listed on the MRS listing that we have. And if you are a new member, if you're just joining, you'll want to make sure that you've joined by September 30th so that you can be on that list to get information. It's also on the blog, the Writers of Kern website. And yesterday I posted something that gives you tips for getting ready for open mic, so that if you're feeling a little bit nervous about it, and that is understandable, we all do feel nervous when we have to talk in front of a group. Even if you're feeling those nerves, you can sort of be comforted and led by some of the tips that are there on the website blog. So take a look at writersofkern.com and hit the blog tab in order to see those. Anything else I should be saying about this, Danae?
No, you're good.
Okay. Okay. Well, one thing I do remember is that we're going to be cutting off registration 2 days before the event. So if you feel like you want to register, make sure that you do that. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'll be looking forward to seeing you right here on October 5th, 7 p.m. to 8:15 for open mic. Thanks.
Okay, so if there are any questions that you have, you can email us at info@writersofkern.com. If it's sent to any place else, so like if it's sent to submissions at writersofkern.com, we won't be able to respond to it. So please send it to info@writersofkern.com. So any questions that you have. Our upcoming events are all online until further notice. And like Anna said, October 5th is our open mic Monday, our first open mic Monday. So get excited. October 17th, I'm not sure how to pronounce our speaker's name, but I think it's Aaliyah Voltz. And it's going to be Memoir, The Art of Questioning Everything. And I'm excited about that. November 2nd will be our open mic Monday for members only. November 21st is Jack Peters, The Goldfish That Barked, 7 Actions to Distinguish Yourself for Success. And then we have December 7th, I think it's the last open mic Monday for the year. And then December 12th, which I'm really excited about, is our members only BYOB, which is Bring Your Own Brunch. And I'm excited about that because I will be bringing a nice little brunch for myself, sit here and enjoy. So if you have any questions, again, email us at info@writersofkern.com.
Thank you, Danae. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a very short break because I know some people might have to use the restroom or grab a cup of coffee or something. It's going to be like a 3-minute break. Well, maybe anyway. So if you want to, you're all muted. So if you want to shut your screen down or, turn off your video or just leave, it's okay. No big deal. And then we will get started. And I know, let's see. Leslie is here. I'm just trying to find you. Since everybody hopefully is back, I am going to get started and introduce our speaker. And she told me how to say her last name, Budewitz, right?
Yes.
Or close enough.
Well, my father had 3 brothers and they all said it differently, so variations are acceptable.
Oh, cool. That's exciting. Anyway, so I have 3 of Leslie's, one of her, let's see. So A Salt and Pepper was the first one, Guilty of Cinnamon, and Killing Time. And I just finished that one and they're all good. And she has another one out that I don't have yet. And she has a new one coming in October, the 5th one in the series. Plus she has a second series. What was that?
It's right behind me.
Oh.
Shy Another Day is the 4th in the series, and the 5th is The Solace of Bay Leaves, and it will be out next month.
And not only are they amazing mystery books, but like we were saying, they have some awesome recipes. Herb black bean pasta salad. I mean, I read these and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm really hungry now. So Thank you. I've gained 3 pounds reading your books, but anyway, Leslie is here. She creates amazing characters in her books, and that's what she's here today to talk about, building character. So Leslie, you're up.
Thank you, Joan, for the introduction and for the invitation. I am not sure how we got connected, but it was a delight to visit with you earlier in the week, and I'm really happy to be here with you this morning. As I said, it is raining and it's a very gloomy day here. So if I'm looking a little too intently up at my notes, that's why, because it's kind of hard to see in here, even with the light on right now. I'll be talking about characters and exercises for creating compelling fiction. Characters drive story, or at least they should. We'll talk about what brings a character to life on the page with a few examples. We'll discuss rants, discovery pages, character traits, personality classification systems, drawing on your own experience. And I will leave time for questions too. You have a handout that lists some of the basics, anything that you might want to take really detailed notes on is on that handout, including list of character traits and a few references. I write mystery, as Joan said, and so a lot of my examples come from that genre, but they apply to all fiction. The heart of every story is the characters. No matter what type of fiction you're writing, whether it's crime fiction, romance, women's fiction, mainstream, literary, especially what we can call literary fiction, characters are critical, and the best plots flow from the characters. Even in, and you might hear the cat yelling outside the door here, just ignore him, as I am. There is someone else, my husband is in the house, so if the cat really needs something, the cat can get his attention. The best plots flow from the characters. Even in a mystery or a thriller where the plot is critical to the success of the story, the characters are the key. When someone tells you about a book they read, they don't say it's about a bomb that, they tell you it's about a guy who. And when readers fall for series, they remember the characters at least as much as the individual plots, sometimes more. So we're going to look at a few ways to dive into your characters and discover what makes them tick. On your handout, you have a very brief definition of character and story. I won't go over that. You all know, because you read and write, what a character is and what appeals to you about a character. But what we're going to be talking about today is a few ways to be a little bit more deliberate and specific about that character development. Whether you are a planner, sometimes called an outliner, or a pantser, you can't write a compelling novel if you don't understand your characters, their core needs, their desires and problems, their struggles, the central emotional conflicts. For example, in a mystery, there has been or is somewhere in the story a critical emotional conflict that leads to the murder itself. There also needs to be a critical emotional conflict or draw that brings our sleuth in and gives our sleuth what my good friend and editor Ramona Long calls the VGR, the very good reason to investigate. You know, most of us would not investigate if we came across a murder. We'd call 911 and hope that that was the end of our involvement. But our amateur sleuths are driven by different desires, and you need to understand what those are. I want to emphasize, as we're getting going here, that what I'm talking about is a right brain process of discovery, not a left brain process of decision making, where you simply decide these things arbitrarily. Talk about a tricky word. I guess I haven't had enough coffee yet. I get to this point, most writers get there, through some form of pre-writing. And that may include taking your characters for long walks, and Joan, this may help you with the effects of the recipes. Writing character analyses, possibly using those character traits that we'll be talking about. And making other notes. Even if you don't write what I would consider to be a plan or an outline. If you decide to simply start writing just out of the blue without knowing your scenario or your characters, and without knowing those core needs and struggles, I'm afraid that your process will almost be doomed to stall. You may find yourself unable to finish the novel, and frankly, you'll be denying yourself a big part of the fun of writing this discovery process. It may not be impossible to get to the end, to write your story by going through this development as you're writing rather than by thinking in advance or away from the page. But I think that you'll probably need to write a lot more drafts if you don't go through some sort of pre-writing process, and it will be harder and more painful. In other words, the more you know about your characters before you start, the better. Those of you who consider yourselves pantsers are probably squirming right now or saying this woman doesn't have anything to share with me. But I want to emphasize that I am not talking about knowing all the plot events in advance, even though I am a planner and do try to come up with some sort of outline. But that's a different conversation. I'm not talking about knowing, and Joan will get this reference because she's read some of the Spice Shop books. I'm not talking about knowing that Pepper confronts Alex about his dishonesty in the cafe on this particular day with this group of secondary characters listening at the kitchen door. What I'm talking about is you, the writer, knowing Pepper's emotional reaction to dishonesty, especially in a romantic relationship, and where it comes from and how she will respond to it. You need to know that Alex can't be honest with her. Why? What will her demands for honesty lead him to do? Because that's where plot comes from. Plot is the action of one character butting up against the reaction of another, which leads to a chain. And then, of course, we braid in all the other characters and their reactions and responses as well. So it's only, in my experience, it's only when we take the time to explore our characters that we end up with coherent, consistent, credible story people. Now, a lot of that is going to happen as you are planning and as you are writing. But I do think that if you do as much of it as you can before you commit to your 2,000 or 2,500 words a day or whatever it is, that your story will flow more smoothly and the process will be a lot more enjoyable. And so that's why I caution against moving too quickly or arbitrarily. It may not matter whether you decide that your character has blue eyes or brown, but then again, it might. But what she wants most out of life and in this story do matter. How she responds when someone stands in her way is what matters. I mentioned that plot unfolds when one character acts and another responds, setting in motion a chain of events. This is sometimes described as goal, motivation, and conflict. What we're doing is looking at the role of character of internal matters in that chain of events. So how do you get there? Well, I've developed a list of what's essential to me to know about each of the major characters, and that is on your handout. For minor characters, you may not need to know all of it or in as much detail. And I developed this list for myself over the years of writing. The Solace of Bay Leaves will be my 10th published novel. I also write the Food Lovers Village mysteries set here in northwestern Montana. There are 5 of those as well. And my 11th published novel is, well, it will be published in April. I just got the copy edits yesterday. So I do have some experience with this, but the original impetus came from a class I took with the great mystery writer Elizabeth George up in Corte Madera near San Francisco 21 years ago. I am definitely a writer who needed persistence to get published. But in her class, she talked a lot about character traits, and we came up with a long, detailed list. You've no doubt seen lists at some point that other people have suggested. What I think is that you should, develop your own list. But the list that I've given you is, I think, a good start. You may find that other things matter to you more than some of the things that I've mentioned, or that you want to add some based on the kind of story you write and the kind of writer you are. But I think that this is a good place to start. First, of course, physical characteristics. How do you picture that character? What's significant about that character? Gender, height, build, race or ethnic origin. What's unique or distinctive? What would the reader notice? For non-point of view characters, what would the point of view character notice? So going back to Alex and Pepper, for example, Alex doesn't notice his handsomely graying temples, but Pepper notices. Alex doesn't realize that he's the kind of man who, when he walks into a room, walks into the center of it and dominates it, but Pepper notices. Think about the character's family and friends. These are critical for your major characters. It may not matter much for your secondary characters. And you may discover more in the later stories if you are writing series fiction. For example, in the Food Lovers Village series, my main character is a young woman named Erin Murphy, who runs a specialty local foods market in the heart of the village of Jewel Bay in her family's 100-year-old grocery. And we know from the start of the book that her father was killed in a hit-and-run accident years earlier. And we know that her mother runs the business. And we know from the very first page that there will be mother-daughter conflict. We know she's got a brother and sister, older, but we don't know anything about that brother other than his name and his order in the family and his profession until book 3, because he's not there. When he shows up in Better Off Dead, that's when we get to learn more about him. And that's when I got to learn more about him, because I didn't need to know much about Nick at that first book, even though I had a 3-book contract. The next item on the list is personality traits and their source. Going back to Alex as my example, how did he develop that sense of himself that Pepper and everyone else notices? He's a chef, and he's loosely based on the late Anthony Bourdain. Very loosely based. But this is where you start to dig into that psychology. It's sometimes uncomfortable. You may need to do some emotional research, which is something I'll talk about later. Think about their work and their home. These may or may not be important to your secondary characters. Both of my series are set in food-based retail shops, and so work is the connection between many of the characters. Their homes, you know, it's important for Pepper, it's important for her close girlfriends whose homes we go to, but I don't know where Sandra, her assistant manager, lives. I have a sort of a vague idea of what part of the city of Seattle she's in, but exactly where, I don't know, because I haven't needed to know. So you don't have to think about all of it. And that's important because you don't want to get stuck in this phase. You know, this is really kind of fun playing with your characters, and you don't want to get stuck there. Some of you may have read the mystery writer Deborah Crumby, who lives in Texas but sets her series in England. And she tells a story about meeting a woman in a presentation who wanted to talk about creating the setting and the map. And she was really interested in the map. And Deborah's books have these really elaborate maps created by an artist in the front of the book. And that was a fun conversation. And then a year later, Deborah ran into her again and she asked how the book was coming along. And the woman said, well, I'm still working on the map. She hadn't written anything because she was so focused on those particular details and on getting them right. And that's fun, but it's death to your story. The next item on my list is quirks. These can easily be overdone but yet they're also a great way to make your secondary characters pop. And you want to find one way to make every secondary character pop. It shouldn't always be a quirk, but a quirk is a good way to do it. For example, in the Food Lovers Village mysteries, the character Tracy always wears really elaborate earrings. And so in every outfit, she's got a different set of crazy, weird, wild earrings, and Erin has fun noticing what they are. The next item is image. Well, obviously for Erin and Tracy, it's the earrings. For Erin, she's also got 3 colored tattoos, 3 colored stars tattooed on her left wrist, and she rubs them for luck. So that's my example of image, and how you can use that to intensify or to create a visual connection between your reader and the character. Secrets, that's the heart of any fiction, not just mystery, but secrets are really, really crucial. So especially when you get stuck, dig into your character's secrets. The next item listed is goals and motivation generally, and in this novel, take your time with these. This is where you take the long walk, or where you think about your characters while you're washing the dishes. Something meditative that gets that brain working. Because you need to know that. You need to discover these things. The conflict, both the internal, which is characterization, and the external conflict, which is plot. What drives Erin to return to Jewel Bay? That's internal after her years away. How does she respond to what happens when she gets there? That's external, and that's where the plot comes from. Growth, character growth throughout the story. If you're writing a very short story, that may not matter as much, but there still needs to be some element of growth. If you are writing a long book or a trilogy, then growth is really your constant companion. Even your villains or your antagonists will grow. Your murder victim, if you're writing a mystery, may not, but your main character's understanding of the victim will grow and change, and therefore your reader's understanding and connection with that character will grow and change. And of course, you need to know the general storyline for that character, and you'll discover a lot of these other elements as you work this out. More that are not on the list that you might consider: the style of dress, particularly for a character whose age range or occupation is not part of your life. I have a lot of younger characters in my story, and of course we should have characters of all age ranges in our story, but I don't have a lot of young people, teens and 20s, in my life right now. So I've had to sit at the coffee shop and watch. I've had to look at magazines, and sitting in the salon, as we used to be able to do, was a great time to do that. Look at physical magazines, look at online websites. I started ordering catalogs from clothing companies that I might never wear, just because I needed a collection of images to be able to picture that character and how they were dressed. Think about their manner of speech. Note any accents or dialects, any quirks or any catchphrases. Think about misconceptions. This is something that I noticed in particular in a book by my friend Barbara Ross, who writes the main Clam Bake series. And her main character, Julia, has been away from this small town for a few years. She comes back when the family's clam bake business gets in trouble to help it out. And she's always had this idea about her mother. And she discovers in maybe the 3rd or 4th book that her idea about her mother was wrong. And it's really extremely well done. These are very well written cozies. And they're not cutesies. They are community-based mysteries. But this point about the misconception is particularly well done there. you'll go back and forth between your characters, your outline or your synopsis and your other notes as you work all these out. It's messy, it's kinetic. Sometimes when I am at this phase, I've got all 9 screens of windows open, and sometimes I have to close 1 or 2 to make another note. And I'm not sure if it's right here or later that I wanted to tell you a story about how that works. I'll wait because I think it's in my books or in my notes later. Just because you know these things about your character doesn't mean putting all that information into the story, like any other research. If a character's work or home isn't relevant to the narrative, as for example, where Sandra lives, then you leave it out. So there's some flexibility with physical description. Some writers like to just reveal height or hair color, for example, if it matters, letting the reader decide what the character looks like. You might be a writer who prefers to give a short description early on to anchor that character in the reader's visualization. And I like to do that. It's jarring when you haven't been given a description, and then on page 200, you read that someone is a redhead when you thought that they were a white blonde girl. And so if you're going to use description, get it in early. And make sure, of course, that it's always in service of the story, no info dumps here. But anyway, those are both equally valid choices. Oh, okay. Here's where I was going to tell you about the example. I am working on a proposal for a new series. And I've written the proposal. It's on my agent's desk, and cross your fingers that it goes out next week and that it finds a home quickly. I create the characters and the plot at the same time. As I said, that's why all those 9 screens are open at the same time. I start with the scenario and the setting. I knew, for example, that this series is going to be set in Seattle, near Pike Place Market, that there will be a bookstore, and that my main character will be a lawyer, young woman who's been away, and she comes back to town when her grandfather, who helped raise her, very, very close relationship, when her grandfather is shot and seriously wounded right outside the bookstore. And so she comes home to Seattle to sit with him. And this means canceling a trip to Paris to go with her boyfriend who's got business there. Eventually, the boyfriend gets the idea that she's not coming back, and he starts asking questions. He even makes a trip out to Seattle to plead with her. And so I keep a running list of notes as I'm thinking about these characters in as close to chronological order as I think it might be. And so I jot these things down as triggers for an eventual scene. So I know that Todd is going to be asking Casey, are you coming back? But because we're in Casey's point of view, we will hear it only from her. So I just make a note in that running outline. Casey has to decide whether she's going back to DC and her job. And then later on, there's a note about the boyfriend coming out to talk with her. Well, she's very close with her sister. There's obviously going to be some conflicts there, of course, but she's staying with her sister. And so her sister is going to ask her about this. And so I make a note about that. Well, then it's obvious the two sisters, who are close in age, are going to be talking with each other about their emotional relation, about their romantic relationships. And so I make a note about that. But then I have to go back to the character analysis for Casey and the one for Kiki, her sister, and make some notes about what I have discovered while I'm thinking about the plot. It's kind of hard to describe, but I think you probably get the idea that I'm working out the plot and the characters at the same point. Their parents, who are divorced, and one of whom will be kind of the quirky humor sidekick in some of the stories, they show up too. And so I may be making notes about them and their relationship, because that clearly will have affected how their daughters deal with relationships. And I saw a question go by very quickly about what are the 9 screens. And that's just a reference to Windows has the capacity for you to have 9 screens open at a time. And so I may have my notes and my running outline and the character analysis for Casey and the character analysis for her grandfather open at the same time, and several other characters too, because I'm bouncing around quite a bit.
Leslie, there's another question too. Do you want to answer it? It's
I
Carla
don't
asks,
see it.
what do you mean by secrets of characters?
Oh, secrets. Yeah, so a secret that the character has is something that she may or may not know, but that the readers, that drives her in some ways, that the readers are going to discover, and it will be shown through her. It may be articulated, it may be shown through her actions. An example, and this might be a bit of a spoiler, but you'll just forget about it when you go to read the Food Lovers Village mysteries, right? So Erin's father was in a hit and run accident when she was 17, when she was a senior in high school. And her best friend, Kim, thinks she knows something about that accident. And she has never revealed it. And this becomes important because now, 15 years later, Erin has returned to their hometown, and Kim is a sheriff's detective. Erin has always felt that the night she lost her father, she also lost her best friend, as if Kim thought that losing a parent was contagious and that she wasn't going to be able to continue this friendship because it was too scary to her. Well, in fact, the reason Kim pulled back from this friendship is this thing she thinks she knows. As it turns out, she's wrong. She knows something, but it's a misconception. She misinterprets it and thinks that someone close to her was involved in that hit and run. She's wrong, but she was also sort of right. She witnessed something and she misinterpreted it. And so through the first 3 books in the series, we learn a little bit more about all of that. So Erin's secret is that she's still really hurt and angry with Kim. And Kim's secret is what she thinks she knows and her shame over not having spoken up about it. And that secret is, of course, what led her to become a sheriff's detective. So you see how the secrets then drive each woman's action. And as you read, I hope you see how it drives their interaction and how the misconception comes into play there too. So I hope that example answers that question. I want to move on to personality classification systems, which are mentioned on your handout with a list of a few possibilities. Many of us have some sort of system we use in our own lives to try to understand people. And so can you use that to apply it and its principles to your characters? Examples are archetypes. When I was a young woman, I read a book by Jean Shinoda Boland called Goddesses in Every Woman, and it was really formative for me. Well, Lena, Pepper's mother, is probably about my age, maybe a little older, and I gave her that book. And in fact, she drew Pepper's birth name from her understanding of the gods and goddesses. And that kind of thinking is one way to think about people. Astrology is another. I'm not knowledgeable enough about it to use it, but if you are, maybe you want to think about the sun sign and the rising sign and some other elements that would influence your characters. Many of us have taken the Myers-Briggs personality inventory, sometimes more than once, sometimes with different results at different stages in our lives. That might be a way for you to think about characters. There's a romance writer named Laurie Schnebley Campbell. I might have her last name's backwards. It might be Campbell Schnebly. Anyway, she uses the Enneagram and she teaches classes about using the Enneagram. The next one I mentioned is homeopathy and constitutional remedies. My husband is a doctor of natural medicine, and so sometimes I have asked him, well, how would you see a character like this? And he draws on his understanding of homeopathy. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, is really useful when you are writing about any kind of mental illness or pathology, whether it drives your villain, your antagonist, or whether it's simply an influence in someone else's life. And I think that we're up to the 5th edition, but you can probably find the 3rd or 4th used in a used bookstore easily if you don't want to spend the fairly hefty price tag of a new one. A friend of mine who is a psychologist gave me her older copy when she bought a new one, and I have consulted it quite often. Another one that is in use quite frequently these days is the Gallup's Strengths Finder. So if that's something that you're familiar with, you might use that to help understand your characters a little deeper. I will say that in my experience, I have found that because I'm a lawyer and I'm a fairly trained observer, and I try to be attentive to who people are and what I see in them, I've discovered that typically I've got a fairly coherent character already. And so what these systems allow one to do is expand and deepen that. You will find, I think, that if you have just intuitively created a character, that when you apply the Myers-Briggs or astrology or whatever it is, that you will have all the basics there already. But these systems may give you more ideas in how to develop the character. So I'm going to talk about some specific exercises to help you get a little deeper into your characters. We don't have time to do them here today, but I hope that you will do 1 or 2 in your next writing session. They only take 3 or 5 minutes. I often find that if I use characters from my work in progress, then exercises I do in a workshop can find their way directly into the manuscript. The first one I want to talk about is physical characteristics and thinking of size. When I was writing Crime Rib, which is the second in the Food Lovers Village mysteries, I was working on a completely unrelated project here in town where there were 2 very large men. They weren't fat, they were just big men, 6'4", 6'5", 250 pounds, just really big men. And you can't see me, but I'm average size, 5'6" or so. And I sometimes felt really intimidated by one of those men. He had a big, booming, deep voice, and he used it to intimidate. At least that was my feeling. The other man had a very gentle personality, and I often felt that he was pulling back and making sure that he didn't intimidate people by his size. And so I wanted to put that into Crime Rib. It ended up not fitting, and so I took it out. But thinking about characters that way was really important for me. A woman who's 5 feet tall and 100 pounds sees the world differently from a man who is 6'2" and over 250. An example of that from mystery is in S.J. Roseanne's series, where she's got a pair of private investigators in New York, Bill Smith and Lydia Chin. And Bill describes himself as the big white guy. He doesn't say a lot. Lydia describes herself as ABC, American-born Chinese. She's got a smart mouth and a black belt. Ethnicity is a factor between the 2 of them as well, along with many other contrasts, but size is one of them. So my exercise for you is to take a character who is of noticeable, who has some noticeable size trait, someone who is very tall or very short, Weight may be a factor. There may be some other feature, and consider how that affects how he or she is in the world, how she behaves or responds. Then what I want you to do is find 3 to 5 places in your story where that character's feelings about size influence how she behaves. You don't need to do this for all your secondary characters, but I think it's a good exercise for 1 or 2. What we're talking about is terms of safety or power, belonging, exclusion, attraction, repulsion. Think, for example, of the boy you knew in the 6th grade who was 6 feet tall, and he wasn't real happy about it. He always felt like he stuck out. Well, he's 40 years old now. How has that feeling influenced him? How has it affected who he is in the world? Obviously, there are many other factors that influence how that boy became that man, but size may well be one of them. Think about the small, strong girl who got praised for her gymnastics and developed a tremendous sense of self. She feels and seems larger than she is. How is that going to affect her on the page? The girl who had acne and never felt confident in her appearance despite now having clear skin. Those youthful experiences of the physical body stay with us. How can you use them in your story? What you're after, of course, here is to understand your character's internal motivations and how they respond, how they react to other people, so that you can choose the best ways to externalize them on the page. Another personality characteristic that you might consider, and I'll just touch on this one briefly, is social standing. We don't have a strong class system in our country the way some cultures have, say, India or Victorian England, but we certainly still have some aspects of it. So think about the character who feels the lack of having an education, or it may impact her financially, but what other ways might it affect her, whether she has an education or whether she lacks one. For example, I'm first generation college educated, and I know that that affects both my point of view on the world and some of my choices. Is one of your characters in a new job? Does she feel secure in it? Does she feel insecure? Prepared? Overwhelmed? Does she need to prove herself because she got fired from her last job? Or does she feel like she's a total screw up who's bound to fail again? How do these things affect what she does? Is there another character who knows her vulnerability? And how does that character use that knowledge to help her or to sabotage her? Again, just take 5 minutes to write about that later. And then find three places in your manuscript where some emotion connected to education or social standing or employment status affects how the character feels and how she acts. I'm going to move on to drawing from your own experience. We are living in amazing times, and you don't have to put a pandemic into your story to be influenced, to draw on the emotions that these times are evoking in you. You don't have to put in a pandemic or wildfire or peaceful protests being interrupted by violence to use the emotions that we're all experiencing. Use your experience and your observations to give your characters anxiety, fear, grief, anger, and on the flip side, maybe grace, generosity, moments of unexpected joy. When I am in the developmental phase of a manuscript, or when I'm writing the first draft, I play a little game with myself and I try to take 3 things from that day's experience. Or if I am walking or driving, I try to come up with 3 things that I can, from my experience, that I can give to that character. This is particularly useful when you're traveling, and we will travel again, and we will get to conferences and conventions. And usually when you're there, You don't have time to write, but you have all kinds of inspiration. You're hearing about stories. You are meeting new people. You are meeting in person someone you've only met online, and maybe there's a little instant connection. Maybe there's a little cognitive dissonance going there. What can you take from those experiences and give to your characters? That's a great way to stay connected to your manuscript when you are away from it. When you are writing a character with a different racial identity, gender identity, sexual orientation from your own, the keys, I think, are the 3 R's: research, respect, and creating a well-rounded character. Because when we're writing characters with different backgrounds from our own, that's when we can sometimes fall into the trap of a stereotype. And stereotypes are bad for fiction. 2 resources I particularly want to mention. Some of you might be members of Sisters in Crime. On October 3rd, Sisters in Crime is presenting a seminar on character with Lou Burney and Walter Mosley. And there will also be a presentation, and I apologize, I can't remember the name of the woman who is giving it, particularly focused on writing characters from backgrounds different from your own. And Sisters in Crime's quarterly often includes a column addressing that issue. Mystery Writers of America's newsletter includes a new column, or it will shortly, called Intersections, that deals with that. And I'm sure that through the California Crime Writers and your own organization, you have come up with other resources to help you with that as well. Some other ways to draw from your own experience. What part of you is in your characters? In The Food Lover's Village, Aaron left Montana and returns only to find the place changed. That is my own experience. And so basically I was updating my own story through the eyes of a much younger woman. Pepper is quite a bit different from me, but we do share some things. Like her, I've been divorced. I bought a house on my own. I've hired and fired, all things that she goes through. And so I can draw on those experiences and give pieces of them to the characters, not just the leads, but to some of the secondaries too. I haven't killed anybody yet, but I have experienced deep anger and deep emotional conflict that, if twisted on the page, could lead down that road. And so have you. Draw on that. What were you afraid of as a child? Who did you envy? Who envied you? Who had a completely different view of your relationship than you did? How did you find that out? And how did you feel about it? And I'm laughing because I'm thinking of a very specific example from my own life. And you all have them too. And as you dig for it, you will learn things about yourself, both good and bad. And give that surprise to your characters. Give them that conflict. I'm going to talk about rants. I love me a good rant. Just glancing at the time here. In April 2012, I attended Don Maz's Breakout Novel Intensive workshop in Hood River, Oregon. And it was a week that truly changed my writing life. I went with a 3-book contract for the Food Lover's Village series. The first manuscript was due in August. I had more than half of a first draft and I felt pretty good. I went home and started over. But Death al Dente won the 2013 Agatha Award for Best First Novel, and I'm just going to show it off because it's right back here, the little black teapot, the Agatha Award. What changed? So I didn't change the plot. As you know, I do outline and I do create character sheets where I focus on learning more about my characters. But my writing was too passive. It wasn't bold enough. There wasn't enough tension in it. My main character didn't drive the story. Obviously, the first few chapters were strong enough because they sold the series based on a proposal. So they were good enough. They were good enough to sell, but they weren't good enough to keep selling. They really weren't as strong as they needed to be. And Don suggested that I give Aaron a rant. Now, he meant it as a character discovery exercise, not as a way to open the story, but it does ultimately become the first couple of pages. If we had more time, I would read you the original opening and then the version I submitted, which remained pretty much unchanged in the finished book. What you would see is attitude and microtension. And that's what going on a rant will give you. Our protagonist has a problem. You know she's going to find a way to solve it. You know from that rant that we are going to have a good old-fashioned mother-daughter conflict, and it will come in the form of a conflict over family business, which is something that's very easy to understand. You have either experienced it, or you've witnessed it, or you've heard about it in your personal lives. They're classic situations. And we know from that rant on the first couple of pages that it is ultimately going to matter to solving the murder, which hasn't even happened yet because we're mystery readers and we know that there's going to be a murder. All that comes from the rant on the first 2 pages. If you are struggling with your main character, if she's not quite coming alive for you, give her a rant. It may not make the final edit, but it will help you find out who she is and find her voice. We all write in part because we want to be heard. We want to give voice to ourselves and to the story people who live inside us. I've got a psychological suspense novel that is out on submission, and the main character is a lawyer, as I am. When I was working on it, I wrote a rant on justice. There's some dialogue, some internal monologue. And all of a sudden, 125 pages into that first draft, I had that woman because I let her go on a rant. Only small bits of it made it into the story, but those bits matter. They really bring her to life. And so I think that that could be a really useful tool for you as well. I'm going to sip my coffee and then move on.
Did you
What
see that
exactly
question?
do you put in a character's rant? Well, you've gone on one yourself. You have just encountered something that really sets you off. And you can go on for 10 minutes about all the things that sets you off about that particular issue. That's a rant. That's what I'm talking about. It might be something you want to write by hand rather than on your computer screen, because when you write by hand, there is a direct connection between your brain and what comes out of that pen. I don't know the physiology or the psychology of it, but it's true. Trust me on this one. You've probably experienced it already yourselves. There's no judgment. When you're writing by hand, you're just letting it flow. When you're typing, sometimes you're judging what you're putting on the page. And what I want you to do in that rant is just go without any judgment, whether you're talking about pre-made pie crust or justice or huckleberry chocolates, which is what Erin goes on the rant about. And she's talking about local food and good food and how they have to make some changes to make this business. And you can hear in my voice that there's a push and a drive to that rant. That's what I want you to get at.
Leslie, a question. So would there, actually it's my question, but so it's not written there, but subtext, is there a lot of subtext in a rant sometimes?
Oh, that's a great point. Yes, there will be a lot hidden in there. When I said that in the opening pages, which really are the rant interspersed with some action and some dialogue, you will see that mother-daughter conflict. That's subtext. You will see that family business conflict, and that too is subtext. That's a really good point, Joan. Thank you. So if there are no other questions at the moment, let me move on to discovery pages. This is sometimes also referred to as a free write. I don't do it very often, but when I do it, it really has helped me understand a character that hasn't fully developed on the page yet. Sit down with your character and let him or her tell you what you don't know about them. Some secret that they've long harbored, something no one else in the story knows. Do this in first person. even if your story is not being told in first person, because what you want to do is internalize that character and then externalize it on the page. And again, I'm going to suggest that you do it by hand for the same reasons. It creates a direct channel to the brain. In this manuscript that's out on submission, there is a priest, and he's actually dead, but we see him alive in a historic timeline. There's a contemporary cold case investigation and then a historic timeline that moves its way forward and eventually joins with the contemporary case. I was sitting in the back of a seminar room. I've forgotten whether it was a writing seminar or a legal ed seminar. It's probably a legal ed seminar that wasn't very exciting. And all of a sudden, Father Leary started talking to me. And I was very much in the early phases of the manuscript. And he told me things that I had no idea about his boyhood and this childhood friend who was in love with a girl in town. And Father Mike's, our eventual priest, his love for this girl, and how that drove their relationship. I learned all kinds of things that sadly led to his death. I even learned who the killer was. And I'm not sure that I would have come up with those things if I hadn't just been in, gosh, kind of a meditative state where I let this man take over the pen and tell me what was going on in his life. Use discovery pages to delve into an incident from your character's past or childhood that still influences them. Again, it's not necessarily going to appear in the book, but it will tell you things you need to know about the character. I mentioned my friend Ramona Long. She uses an exercise that she calls channeling O.J. Simpson, who, as you might remember, wrote a book called If I Did It. And so she suggests that your killer, who will deny having done the deed, that your killer write, if I did it, here's why I would have done it, here's how I would have done it. And that's an interesting exercise that I used in one book as well. I'm going to move on to emotional research, which is something I alluded to earlier. In a way, it's the opposite of drawing on your own experience. Sometimes characters have experiences that we haven't had. I mentioned that Erin lost her father when she was 17. My father died when I was 30, so those are very different experiences. I knew some of the emotion that she might feel just from observation, but also from having been a lawyer working personal injury cases. But I felt I needed to know more to really understand this girl and what she'd been through and what it might lead her and other people in the story to do. So I sat down and I wrote by hand, and I clearly remember doing this in the hotel room in Hood River during the Breakout Novel intensive. And I wrote by hand about every person I could think of who had lost a parent when they were a child, whether it was someone I knew well or didn't know. It turned out that I knew quite a bit just from drawing on my own observation, some of it decades old. I wrote about a high school classmate whose father died the year after we graduated, but then also her experience of losing her own husband in his mid-40s, leaving her with a small child. Two different experiences. She saw it from the child's perspective, the teenager, and then as a mother. And that helped me understand what Francesca, Erin's mother, went through, that dual perspective. I wrote about my reaction and that of my high school classmates when a boy in our high school was killed during our junior year in a car accident. And that's something that very much works its way into Blind Faith, the manuscript that's out on submission right now. Talk to people who've had this particular experience that you want to write about, if you feel you can, or to people who have been involved in it with it in other ways. For example, I mentioned that my husband is a doctor of natural medicine. with kind of a general practice. And sometimes there are things that I ask him to tell me, which he does in a very general way, you know, maintaining confidentiality, but he can still give me his perspective on how this character might think or feel about this experience. Talk to your friend who teaches high school, or your walking buddy who's a social worker. With this example, I also searched online for guides for teachers and school counselors about dealing with students who had lost a parent. You could also read memoir or personal accounts or YA novels that involve that situation. And from all of that, I was able to see how Erin would have responded, the different ways that her older brother and sister who weren't in the house anymore, how they would have responded, and her mother, and how that affected their relationship at the time, and how it affects it now, 15 years later, when they are in business together. Francesca still wants to protect Erin, of course, who's 32, and the mother knows she can't any more than she could when Erin was 17 and went off to college. What does that lead her to do and say? And that actually informs that rant and the subtext of it on those first 2 pages. So it all has ripple effects. For Erin, I did that during the first draft, but for Bitterroot Lake, the book that will be out in April, I did it during revision in response to questions from my editor, who felt that one particular character needed to be a little more fully developed. And so that character was driven from bitterness and resentment. So what I did was think about all the people, not all, but some of the people I knew who, from my perception, are driven in part by resentment. I read articles in Psychology Today online and other sources, and all of that helped me develop what I intuitively knew, what I instinctively knew, and gave me specifics. A little tip in reading some of these articles, sometimes people in the comments will tell their own stories, and that might give you just the specific that you might not have thought of yourself. So you are borrowing from other people's experience in doing this research. You're seeing how they view the world, what language they use, and what this particular character, it will help you figure out what this particular character in this crisis might do. Do we have any questions here?
I was going to interrupt for just a moment. If you have questions, make sure you put them in the chat. If you don't know where the chat is, if you kind of scroll and mouse over the bottom of the screen, it'll say chat and it'll bring it up, and just ask questions, and Donna and I will keep an eye on them. I do have a question if you don't mind. And I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget. Okay, so you have a lot of characters, Leslie. I mean, you have 2 different series, plus you have individual books. And so my question is, I know you have character sheets, but how do you remember the specific details? I mean, you know, Pepper's short hair or somebody else. How do you remember perfectly so you don't change a name by mistake? Or
how do I keep track of it?
Yeah, how do you have like a character Bibles for each series?
Yeah, I do. I print out those character analyses when I think they're relatively complete. And of course, I may end up scribbling notes on them as well. And then I put them, I 3-hole punch them and put them in a fat binder. And each of the series has its own Bible. And in the character section, the first character will be the main character. And then I put a sheet of colored paper, and then I put the rest in there in alphabetical order by their first name so that I can find them quickly. For somebody like Erin or Pepper, who appears in each book, I may make an addendum for book 2, and I'll write out the general storyline, the growth, any new things I learn about the character in that in the planning process for that book. And again, I'll print it out and put it in the binder. It's really useful to me in the first draft, but it's also extremely useful in the revision stage. And you might also find yourself referring to it if you're writing. Inevitably, once you start getting published, you're working on more than one book at a time. So for example, you might be writing a first draft when you get the copy edits on the book that's going to be out and you're promoting yet another book. And if you want to be able to remember these things, these cheat sheets are really important. Does that answer your question, Joan?
Yes, thank you.
And actually, I will say one other thing, because you mentioned Pepper and her short spiky hair. I have a strong visual of her because I gave her some really specific characteristics. I'm not sure what color her eyes are, because I would have to look that up, because I don't envision that, but I do envision that kind of short spiky hair. And I know how she dresses. Usually she's in her shop, what she calls her shop uniform, stretchy black pants and a black t-shirt with her shop logo and an apron with that shop logo. But I know how she's going to dress otherwise too. And so I can picture her, and she's quite distinct from Erin.
Right.
They're different ages.
I use like Pinterest or something and always print out pictures of my characters so I can refer to them. Do you use something like that, or do you
So
just
that's
keep it
a
all in your
great
head?
suggestion. I do use Pinterest, and I create a secret board for each book. And then when the book comes out, I take some of the images from the secret board and move it into the public page for that particular series. And because not everything is something that the reader needs to see, and not everything it ends up being final. For example, for the secret board for Bitterroot Lake, there are half a dozen images that I pulled from real estate sites of what Sarah, our main character's house in Seattle, might look like. Well, I'm only going to put one of them on the public page. I might not put one at all because we never go there. I just needed an image of it. That's another book with a strong historical backstory. It's not a separate timeline, but she discovers a lot about her family's history that she didn't know. And it's in the form of scrapbooks and photograph albums. I don't have those things from my family because I'm way down the descendant list as the youngest of the youngest and that sort of thing. But I have a good friend who has a treasure trove. She has photograph albums, scrapbooks, baby books from 1920, all kinds of things. She's got just boxes and boxes of this family archive. And some of it is quite historically important. Some of it's just personal family stuff, but she let me spend time with it. And me and my trusty iPhone, I took pictures of all these things, not all of them, but of some of them. And I got to see what a 1920s baby book looked like. And at that point, I had actually already turned in the story, but when I did my developmental edits, I added a little bit more detail about those images because of my friend's treasure trove. And those pictures will ultimately be on the public page as well. So thanks for mentioning that one.
Yeah, cool.
There
Sandy
was
asked,
just another question that popped up, but I missed
well,
it.
Sandy asked, can you explain subtext?
Yes. Subtext is when the literal meaning of a phrase or a sentence, a snatch of dialogue, says one thing, but implies another. And so when we read this conversation, a little bit of a spat between Erin and her mother, Francesca, over where to put the huckleberry chocolates on the shelf in the Merc, their family store, there's an implication of an underlying tension. Francesca says these huckleberry chocolates have been next to the cash register for 30 years. That's where they belong. Erin says, we need to put them somewhere else. She says it a little more tensely than that, but there's a back and forth about it, and they physically move those chocolates. What's really going on underneath? It's not about where to put those chocolates. It seems like it is because Erin has come in, her mother has brought her in to take over this failing business. And one of the things Erin wants to do is focus on good food, local food, and these things aren't exactly her image of it. And Francesca at one point says to her, you have known the woman who made those chocolates for 30 years. What is wrong with you? What has gotten into you? Nothing's gotten into me. I just think, you brought me here to make changes in the business. Let me make them. And some of that is under the surface. You don't necessarily fully understand it at this point because we are only on page 1 and 2, but you get that there's more going on. And because you're a daughter yourself and you might be a mother and you've observed mother-daughters if you're a man, you know that there's something else going on here. And hopefully you trust the reader to make it pay off later. So that's what I mean by subtext. I think Jim Bell, whom you may know from the Los Angeles area, has written a book on subtext. I'm just going to turn around and look at his section on my writing shelf and see about that. I can't read the titles well enough, but I think he may have dealt with that.
Is that James Scott Bell?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
He might have written about subtext more fully. And his slim books on various aspects of writing are quite good. Was there another question?
Yes, Debbie asks, how much dialogue can be used to develop characters, or should that be done mostly through narrative?
Oh, good question. And I think that both should develop character. Everything serves every purpose, right? No, everything doesn't serve every purpose, but dialogue should show you character. It should show you the tension between characters. Your description of movement can build the character because I move in a different way than Joan moves or that Danae moves. How we have these gestures, this thing that my hand does, that shows you character in some way. And so description can do that too. I mentioned clothing, and that is something you might describe. You don't want to stop and describe it, but you might say that Kristen unwrapped her scarf, and that tells you a little bit about who she is, as well as creating a visual. So it's a combination of both the narrative and the dialogue that develops characters.
So any other questions, anybody? I know in cozies you can't really cuss, you're not supposed to. And so Pepper always has her amazing cuss words that are all spices. So
yeah. Pepper says things like holy margaroli and holy oregano. Parsley poop is one of her favorites. You know, they're a little bit unrealistic, but also
it's character.
I know
See,
people
that's
who talk
character.
like that. So I've got one more topic on naming. If we have time for that.
Definitely have time. Yes.
Or do we have more questions?
We've
selected COVID as our new curse word. Got it. The 5-letter word. Yep, definitely.
No, we're good.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about naming. Names are critical to characters. Erin Murphy, as you can tell from her name, is half Italian. You're muted, so I can't hear you laughing, but you should be laughing, right? Names tell us a lot, and they influence how we think about ourselves. When I was a kid, no one could ever pronounce my last name, and I got a lot of teasing about it, and that influenced me. I also had a first name that was in the process of changing genders. And that sometimes brought up some confusion, particularly in law school in applications for internships. I actually remember walking into an interview and because my resume said Leslie, not Leslie Ann, the interviewer was surprised and actually said, oh, it's a girl. Well, your characters have those stories too. We also have naming stories, how our parents named us, what other names they might have chosen, what was the name that they would have given a boy or a girl, the whatever gender they didn't get. We all have experiences of how other people respond to our names, whether they're common or distinctive. Give your characters those stories. And again, it may or it may not make it onto the page, but it will influence that character. So for example, with Erin, she's got this very Irish name, and that comes from her father's side of the family. Well, her mother, Francesca Conti Murphy Schmidt, is from an Italian American family. And Erin very definitely identifies fairly strongly with that Italian ancestry, even though she's here in the town that the Murphys helped found, and her uncles and her cousins are here too. She's got kind of a dual, sometimes warring ancestry there. And I think many of us can identify with that and experience it. So it does sometimes find its way into the story, usually because these are cozies in a humorous way. And cozies have a strong humorous element to them. At least most of them do. Certainly mine. Certainly I try. Names reflect age, family origin, and, as I've said, ethnicity. Watch for crutches. A name may be a shorthand to reflect ethnicity or personality, but it may also be inaccurate or stereotypical. So be careful when you make your choice. Pay attention to the sounds and to the syllables. An editor spotted my tendency to give women names with 2 or 3 syllables and men names with 1 syllable. I know where that comes from. The men in my family are Don, Dave, Tom, Bill. They're rarely William or David or Thomas, except in a formal or a legal setting. So I've learned to pay attention to that and to have more Peg and Kate and Rose and Connor and Aiden and Brian, and not just the 1 syllable men's names. The best way to keep track of all that is to keep a running list of both the first and the last names in alphabetical order so that you don't repeat yourself too often. In Bitterroot Lake, the name of the murder victim's secretary kept changing. That poor woman, I think she ended up with 4 or 5 different names. Finally, I settled on Erica. It was absolutely perfect for her until I realized that the murder victim's last name was Erickson. Well, you can't do that. And so her name ended up being Renee. But as I said, she went through several permutations until I finally found one that fit her age and her background, worked with all the other characters, and wasn't repetitive. It is 2 syllables, but there are definitely some 1 syllable women's names in that book. Nicknames can be great plot devices. Pepper's staff all want to know her legal name, and she is not about to tell them. You have to read Killing Time to find out what it is. Names can be a great source of humor, and I play with that a lot. They can also reveal personality and personal history. In Death al Dente, the first Food Lovers Village mystery, Erin tries to check out a character named James Angelo, and she can't find him. She knows enough about him that she ought to be able to find more about him, but he doesn't seem to exist. It turns out he changed his name. His birth name, the poor man, J. Walker. Well, you can imagine what kind of parents would name their child J. Walker. It might have been fun. In this particular case, it was kind of cruel. And that's one of the tensions. That's his naming story. That's what he grew up feeling, that he'd been mocked by his own father. Now, not every child would feel that way, but that's how this man felt. And I learned a lot about him from the fact that he got rid of that name and that identity as soon as he could. Obviously, most of your characters' parents didn't choose their name with an idea towards influencing personality, but you can do it because this is fiction, you're in charge. And so much when it comes to names is subtle. Sources for names, think of your own family, your own address book. The Social Security Popular Names Index is hugely important. It has listings for the popularity of names by decade with both genders. And so if you're looking for a character born in the 1930s and you don't want to give them your own mother or grandmother's name, think of that Popular Names Index and look there. If you're in a community that still has a phone book, use that. Lists. I live in a very small town, and our weekly newspaper often lists kids who are involved in high school sports or the speech and drama team or who have made the honor roll, and those are helpful for names for a certain age. Look at obituaries, maybe even a cemetery. Baby name books, both online and in print. There are online sources for names from particular countries or ethnicities. You can also keep a running list for yourself of particularly intriguing names and collect them. I really, really wanted to name a character Lark. I just love that. For a woman of a certain age, that was maybe early 30s, Lark would be a great name. And so I was going to name an old friend of Casey's in the proposal that I'm working on, Lark, until I realized that Casey's family name is Clark. Well, I couldn't change that because I couldn't change that. And I can't have both a Clark and a Lark. So she became Wren. And then it didn't work with the last name I'd given her. So she became Wren Warren. And I actually like that. Her first name is contained in her last name. It's a little bit of a kind of a joke a parent might play, but actually it's very sweet. And it looks good on the page, and maybe when I actually write the book, it'll stay, and maybe it won't, because sometimes characters tell you that their name is different than you thought it was. And it's kind of weird and woo-woo, but you've probably experienced it already. And I urge you to listen to that voice. So Joan, I think we are coming close to the end of the time you told me to plan for. And we've got some time for questions. And I see a note from Bill that when he thinks of unusual names, he always thinks of Dweezil Zappa. I have actually met Dweezil, and he is a charming man, and he embodies that name. He makes it fit. Some of us might not. Someone bought my Seattle series to give to her mother for Christmas. Thank you. That's lovely. That's lovely.
They're awesome books. I mean,
Thank
you
you.
know.
Other questions, comments? Gary's
thank you.
waving.
Yes. Thank
Is there
you.
a question?
No. Thank you. Yeah, I want all questions to be in the chat because it's just much easier than, you know, having people start being unmuted. It's just a little, it gets rough with 30. Well, we only have 36 on here now, but we started with quite a bit more. Anyway, Leslie, thank you so much. Big, giant applause. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of messages in the chat for you too.
Great.
Excuse me.
I want to thank you all for inviting me and for being an attentive audience. Let me mention two things. On my website, lesliebudewitz.com, I do have a sign up for a newsletter, but it is aimed at readers. What I think you as writers might be more interested in is my blog twice a week. I blog on something of interest to writers. On Wednesdays, it's Writing Wednesday. And on Saturday, there is a creativity quote, and it's lesliebudewitz.com/blog. You'll find the tab on the website on the toolbar on top. Thank you very much. And if there are any further questions, I'm happy to try to answer.
Yeah, we can keep an eye on them too. And actually, that's how I found you. I mean, I've read your books, but in your newsletter, you said, if you want me to speak to a group, and me being the nervous, bold person that I am, I wrote to you and figured the worst you could say was no. I mean, you know, and so that's how this all came about. And so that kind of, and it's not, I don't think I've met very many of the authors that I read. I mean, it's really cool for me to, you know, to be able to meet someone and listen to you and your process. And so, as everybody here at Writers of Kern know, we try to always find writers that are an interest to everybody. I mean, even though Leslie writes mysteries, she still writes characters. So characterization, I mean, whether you write, even if you write memoir, you're still going to need to put character quirks and all that kind of good stuff. So I'm losing my voice here.
We didn't talk about nonfiction, but actually my first published book is nonfiction. It is called Books, Crooks, and Counselors, How to Write Accurately About Criminal Law and Courtroom Procedure. And that came out in 2011, and it is a guide for writers on using the law. It grew out of people asking me questions. Some of you may know Doug Lyle from LA, the medical doctor who wrote a book, and I got the idea from him. He was very encouraging.
So do you have any last words of advice? I mean, just something really short. Do you have anything, last words for someone struggling on making a character come to life? I know I'm catching you off guard here. But.
Well, yeah, and as you have noticed, I don't do good with short answers. I like long answers.
That's okay. It's okay. You can take a few
But
minutes.
I will say that have fun with this. Treat your characters as real people and get to know them. And that, of course, is not something I could say to a group who doesn't have some experience with writing, but you all know that these people do become real to us. And if they aren't well-rounded make them well-rounded. And that's one of the things that personality trait list, that character trait list that I gave you helps with, and something that using a personality system like Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram and so on can help you with, to make sure that you have touched on all sides of a character. You may be familiar with the phrase "save the cat," the advice that Blake Snyder gave to screenwriters. Make sure that your killer saves the cat, that somebody we're not going to like does something positive. And the point I want to make with that is that you need to know that. It may not show up on the page, but you need to know that so that you have some sort of empathy with your characters, because empathy and connection is what's ultimately going to make them interesting to your readers as well as to you. And maybe that's my short sound
Awesome.
bite.
That's perfect. Thank you. Anyway, thank you for joining us all the way from Montana. Thank you to everyone else that's joined us from across the United States and other countries. And so I think that's it. And all of our meetings are still going to be free. All these monthly meetings, unless they're for members only, and then you got to be a member. But we don't charge. That's our one thing that that's how we're trying to give back to the community of writers right now. I mean, it just, as long as you register for, and we only have a limit of 100, so know that we do have a limit, but we want to open our speakers up to anybody who wants to come and listen and learn. So anyway, thank you for being here. Have a wonderful day, Leslie.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
All right. Take care, everybody.